So we are back with another sewing project. This goal for today is to take these pants, and as you saw in the video before, we need to bring them in quite a bit. We're going to do that by taking in the side seams, taking in the back, but also adding pleats to the front to kind of give it a cool, modern, updated vibe while also taking in a lot of the waistband. We've got a total of 9 inches, so what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much we can possibly take in on both sides and back before it gets too tight, and then that will give us our final amount of how much each pleat needs to be coming in. We're going to do 2 pleats. We're going to be doing, I think we're going to be doing reverse. We're going to do forward-facing pleats, and we're going to rip off this whole waistband and see if we can bring these pants in 9 inches without making them look like they were brought in 9 inches.
So while I'm sitting here writing down some of these notes on how much I'm going to end up taking in the waistband, I want to note that yes, I am taking these male patterned pants to fit a female, but this works if you're taking male pants to fit a male. It doesn't matter, same process. It just goes to show how big of a gap we can make a pant waist fit. But back to what we're doing right now, I'm measuring the back pockets to make sure that I don't take in too much because we don't want those pockets to touch. We also don't want any of the pinstripes to go wonky across the back of the pants, so we're just doing some calculations to make sure that none of that's going to be a problem. And then we're going to add up how much is coming in on the sides, how much is coming in on the back, and then that'll tell me how much needs to come in on the pleat. So a little bit of quick math to figure it out. But honestly, once you get that figured, it is pretty smooth rolling afterwards. So now we are going to get into ripping apart the waistband. This is going to be very vital because to take in this much, we can't keep making splits in the waistband. We need to completely remove it and then pull it through the back of the pant. This will also allow us to put the pleats in without having to mess with the waistband, and overall just make it very seamless. So we're going to remove some of the suspender buttons and just go ahead and rip that waistband from the top of the fabric.
So we've got the whole waistband off and literally just a couple minutes into this project, and we've already made our first mistake. Not super big deal. We'll be able to fix it rather quickly, but I ripped the whole waistband apart, so the front and the back piece. I should have left it all together and just taken the waistband off of the pant itself. So we've got to go through and restitch all that back together just to make it easier on us. However, with everything off, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to start taking in the areas that need to come in, starting with the back first. We're going to rip apart this side seam here, suck all that in at the pocket, and then remove this coin pocket and figure out, press, and baste our darts in so that they're right where we want it. At that point, we'll do another fitting, make sure that it's where we need it before we throw the waistband completely back on. And from there, we should be set with trimming down the waistband, putting it back together, and hopefully having everything done the way we need it to. So let's get to the machine. We're going to do some sewing, and we'll be back to chat to the camera here in a second.
So let's get right into fixing our mistake and putting the 2 waistband pieces together. Do not take it apart. It's not a hard fix. Just don't do it. Now, as we go through the rest of the pant, figuring out where to take in all this material, the name of the game is going to be keeping the pockets proportional. We do not want those side pockets to match with the back pockets, and we don't want the back pockets to touch either. Now, if you're working on a pair of pants that's maybe only a size or two too big, you really don't have to worry about that because all the extra material is going into those pleats. But because we have about 9 to 10 inches to take in, we've got to get really creative on how we do this. And the way we're taking in these side seams is very much like how we take in the crotch. We're going to measure the max amount from the back and just suck it into that front seam. We're not taking it on the double of the seam, or then you're going to start messing with the pocket. So right here, we're going about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. We're going to take the max in, rip apart the seam, and then taper it all, connect it all back in. So I apologize in advance for my hands getting in the way of a lot of these shots, but what we are doing in this segment is just working with the different pleat sizes. Right now we're at about 3/8, working on 3/4, just really figuring out what we want to bring in and what's going to look the best, and then we're going to hand baste it into place so that we can put the whole waistband back together, but easily take it apart with the basting threads if we need to adjust the size of it. Now for this pant, we are going to be doing 2 pleats about 1.5 inches apart. And the way we make our pleats is we measure how big we want them. So this second one's going to be 1/2 inch. And then we just double that and make a full measurement of 1 inch. I'm doing it in 1/2 inch segments because my math was a little bit slow that day. And then you're just going to take the back mark and fold it to the front, and that'll give you a total of 1 inch pleat, but I call it a 1/2 inch pleat because you double it. So here's a view of that waistband with everything done, taking it on the sides, the back put in, and the pleats put in as well. This is when you really want to go over and make sure you like the spacing, the amount that the pleat depth is, because once you put that waistband on, it's going to be a pain to rip it off and fix it.
All right, so we are actually on to day 2 of this project. We would have got it done the first day, but we had some customers come in, had to take care of them. But for today's process, we are going to finish hand tacking down the pleats, and then we're going to reassemble the waistband, putting that back on. But we did a dry fitting. This thing fit amazing. So all we have to do is make sure that we get this thing back on there right so that it also fits on the waist. Probably do some hemming, but otherwise we're just going to get right back into hand tacking these pleats down.
So the reason why we're doing this is just to keep the pleats a little bit more formal, and plus we're going with a very standard just pick stitching for the tack down portion. I think it's going to give it a nice little bit of hand detailing to the trouser that you're not going to get from a normal off the rack kind of deal. Plus it was an opportunity for me to work on some of my hand stitching. So that's why we went with this route. We're going about 3/4 down. We don't want to be too deep of a tack, but just enough to give it a little bit of stylistic flair, if you will. And with all of that done and pressed, it is ready to put this waistband back on. As you can see here, we are sewing it real close to that fusing on the waistband. Usually if you are taking apart your waistband, just keep note on how it goes back together, because every time it can be a little bit different. But this one went right at the bottom of that fusing and stitched about the same amount down. So I just made sure both edges were lined up, stitched straight across, and then we were ready. The last thing that we had to do on this waistband before we completely closed it was add the side adjusters, which were just tacked right under the side. So we just marked them, made sure that they were even on both sides, and then we just did some top stitching to keep them in place because, again, I think it's a cool little added touch. So for putting the waistband back together, you probably recognize these tacks. These get put in at the end, but underneath, the bulk of the waistband gets held together with a blind hemmer. You go across the whole waistband, just sewing it right to the main fabric. You can do this by hand, but it might take a while. Also, if your pants have belt loops, this is when you reattach them after the blind hemming stage. And all we had to do was a few spots of hand tacking, namely right here on the waistband, because I could not get my machine foot in this far because of the buttons and the way that it was all tacked. I would have had to have ripped apart the zipper, and it would have just been much easier to do this kind of like whip stitch across the side. We only had about 1 inch, so yours might be the same way. Don't feel bad for having to hand tack the last little bit. It's not going to be noticeable, and it's going to hold just as good as the straight stitch would. So the last order of business is getting this hem figured out. As you can see, we are taking off a lot of material, but we're actually keeping quite a bit on there because I decided to go with an exaggerated cuff. We're looking at like 2.5, 2 3/4, which is relatively big even for someone of my size. But I think the way that these are supposed to be slightly oversized and it's going to have a more full break to the bottom, I think this 2.5 inch cuff is going to look really good rather than just doing a plain bottom. So here we're just running it through the blind hemmer. Now the beauty of a cuff, and you can watch my cuff video, is you can use a straight stitch if you don't have a blind hemmer because the cuff does cover that stitch. But for me, I have the machine, so it's just so much easier to run it through. And once we get the first round tack down, we just go back around with a small tack to hold the cuff once we get everything pressed. And here's our finished product. We've got all of the pocket spacing the way I love it. I love the way that big cuff turned out, and I think the forward-facing pleats are definitely the way to go. I am super proud of how all of this went down, but I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think.
Hopefully that was enjoyable for you guys. This is day 4 of finally wrapping up this video, but I was so happy with this project that it was worth the time that it took. So you let me know how you feel about it, what you thought. Was this educational? I know this was a bit of a breeze through kind of thing because there's a lot of different steps. I wasn't able to hit each one independently, but I think it turned out pretty good. So you guys let me know. Thanks for watching. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I will see you next time we work together. Have a good one, guys. Bye.